My name is Hunter Cheney. I'm one of the directors of the Collings Foundation. Thank you. Thank you for your participation in this unique event. Your contributions support our ongoing educational programs and restorations and operations, and for that, our most sincere thank you for coming here today. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Collings Foundation, we're an educational nonprofit foundation established in 1979. The purpose, since we were founded, the purpose, the goal of the foundation, of course, is the preservation and exhibition of very rare historical artifacts. And also the presentation of living history events like the one we have today, to engage people in history, to educate through tactile experiences. Now, of course, the real meat and potatoes of what we've been doing up to this point has been a national tour of World War II bomber and fighter aircraft. Some of you might know the Wings of Freedom tour. So we're on our 29th year operating this historic aircraft tour that visits over 110 cities every year. So the program itself is seen by over 5 million people annually. It is, I can tell you, it is one of the most rewarding and fulfilling things that we do is the operation of this national tour. And now, thanks to the Littlefield family and Jacques Littlefield donating his collection of historic artifacts and tanks to us, we had the ability to create the American Heritage Museum around this collection, and we are just nearing completion of this new museum here on the Stowe grounds, and we are just thrilled. And I hope every one of you have a chance to come see this new museum and take away something meaningful from it. And we're very, very proud of that museum and where it's at now. So this day, we're talking about World War II history. In the 1930s, tribalism and terror had reared its ugly head again. Adolf Hitler abolished democracy, espousing a radical and racially motivated revision of the New World Order. The fascist movement under Mussolini quickly aligned themselves with the Nazis, spreading their ideologies and divisiveness, racism and hatred, and domination across Europe, east, west, north, and south, into Africa. The Russians, of course, with their tepid alliance at first, quick to find that it was not within their best interess. Nationalism and militarism seeped into Asia as Hirohito and Tojo rampaged through China and all its Asian neighbors, enslaving and killing at every opportunity. Eventually, the tripartite pact was made, and the Axis's murderous power was solidified. The reign of brutal terror looked to be unstoppable. Then, on December 7th, 1941, 77 years ago, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And we knew that the time had come. We knew we could not let this continue. These warped and discordant maniacs did not care about civil liberties. They did not care about truth or justice. Their intentions were clear. Further their empires and kill or enslave those who opposed them. We came to the grim realization that freedom of people all around the world was in jeopardy. Americans felt this with such conviction that our sons, our daughters, brothers and sisters went off to foreign lands to resist, to fight, to push back. As a nation, we came together knowing that if we lost all that we enjoy, the right to vote, the right to question and challenge our leaders, the right to a free press, racial and ethnic equality, decency, civility to one another, all of these things would be lost, would be gone. Young men and women from all walks of life gave themselves, made the ultimate sacrifice so our children would not have to endure such horrors. On the ground and in the air, our veterans endured dangers beyond belief. Day after day, in the roughest conditions imaginable, so we can continue to enjoy the freedoms that we all cherish today, on this day. As children of this generation, and this is important, as children of this generation, it is up to us to keep this history close, to remind ourselves freedom is not free and democracy is fragile. Never forget the horror of war. Never forget what happens when tyrannical leaders spew hate and dissension. For if we do, this will inevitably creep back. If we forget this history, again, we will ultimately be repeating it. To be able to listen to these veterans, these young men who risk their lives for us, is a great honor. And to that, I'll pass on to our first speaker, Ed. And what we'll do is, let's spend a couple minutes talking a little bit about the branch of service you guys were in, what you were up to a little bit. And then as we get up to Joe, then after Joe is done, if we have some time, we'll do some questions and answers. Ed?
Yes. Hi, my name's Ed Brisbois. Yeah. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, December 41, I was a freshman in high school. All my older friends went over and joined the Marine Corps. Me and my buddy went over and they said, go home, come back when you're 17. So when I went back in 43, I wanted to get in the Marine Corps, and there wasn't a draft leaving for a month, and they said, but there's a chief, why don't you go talk to him? And I said, why? And he said, well, they got a group leaving in a week. So I went over, and he talked me into joining the Navy, went out to boot camp. Ended up, I qualified for aviation, radioman gunner, sent down to Memphis, Tennessee at the air base. Sitting around there, and I start looking around at some of the junk planes. I said, this isn't for me. And the bulletin come up on the board. They were looking for volunteers for the amphibious force in Florida. So me and a few of my friends said, let's get out of town. Got put on a train, went down to Fort Pierce, Florida, the amphibious base there. We started training, and it was a complete school. They had UDT, underwater demolition, beach battalion, scouts and raiders, and attack boat crews. So we all trained together for a month, and into the second month they divided us into different groups, and I was still 17. They ended up in the boat groups with the attack boats, and July we got left on a train. They sent us up to New York. We ended up going aboard a brand new attack transport, the USS Leo, aka 60, down through the Panama Canal within a few weeks period, out to Hawaii. From Hawaii, we didn't know it at the time, but we were getting ready for the landing in Iwo Jima. I really don't like to talk about these things anyway. From there, we were sent back to the state Christmas of 44, and we had to pick up our combat load. We didn't know at the time, but we were loading for Iwo Jima, and we sent back to Hawaii and Maury Island. They attached us to the 4th Marine Division. And from that time on, for 2 months, we trained with the 4th Marines and hop skip all the ways over to Saipan. And a few days before the Iwo Jima invasion there, they opened up the torpedo nets and our convoy left. And we were fast transport, so all their slow ships had left the day before, and we passed them. And on D-Day, my group, we were loaded.
Well, I'm better known as Dick Watson, as the name implies. There's one thing that I want to do first. I want to honor all the veterans that are in the audience. Would you please stand? The veterans. I have one thing to say. Thank you for your service. It means a lot to all of us. Now, I went into the service in 1944. They thrust a bugle into my hand. Not without a problem or two. Kind of humorous in a way. I was out to stand reveille one morning, and a cloud of talcum powder came out of my bugle. Now, as a second unconsecutive morning, I attempted to blow the bugle. However, it was full of rags. They loved the bugler. So that was a connection. Now there's something else in regards to bugles that got me. And that was when I went to machinist training in Omaha at Fort Crook. It seems that we played in all kinds of weather, and this was in the middle of winter. If any of you have been in Nebraska, you'll know what I mean about the extreme cold. So, this reminds me of the story of the Christmas story. How many of you have seen that picture? A few of you. Remember the scene where the kid stuck his tongue out and got stuck on the pole? That happened to me with my bugle when I was doing revel. Very interesting. Thank you, sir. And, I got to tell you about an experience I had at Camp Shelby. How many of you in the service ever went through the gas station? I see one over there. You know what I'm going to say? You had to go in the chamber, give your rank, serial number, and that was about it, but that was enough. I was so impressed, I cried, only because of the gas, not because I was mentally disturbed. And of course, we underwent the usual obstacle course with gunfire overhead. Remember that? So my first sergeant decided he'd remind me that I was in the service and had to participate in the Army 24 hours a day. You see, I went on furlough. And while I was on furlough, I was called back to Camp Shelby early. And he reminded me that you're on service. Well, that was fine. After I got back to Camp Shelby, we went on, shall we say, maneuvers? Bivouac is what they called it. So it was early in the morning, and I was on my way to breakfast. And a friend of mine was following me. All of a sudden, I disappeared. He said, "Where'd you go, Dick?" So down at the bottom of a foxhole, I said, "I'm down here." The foxhole was so well camouflaged that I didn't see it. Fortunately, I didn't get hurt. Anyway, so I decided I'd take a cruise to Okinawa. Compliments of the government. They were very good. They paid for my cruise to and from Okinawa. And besides that, they gave me $21 a month. So I couldn't complain. Anyway, that's about the size of my experiences in the service.
Joe, and then after that, hopefully we'll have some time.
That's fine.
My name is John McAuliffe. I served in the infantry. I was trained in heavy weapons, which is the mortar, and machine guns. And we got on the Queen Mary out of New York City on January 1st. The Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth were making routes back and forth alternately. Each one carried 18,000 troops. We landed up in the Firth of Clyde in Scotland. Then they brought us down through Southampton, England, and across the Channel in LSTs. We boarded boxcars, which are freight trains, in the middle of winter, and we were replacement troops. They brought us up to Metz in Germany, where the men were distributed to various divisions, regiments, and companies. The captain had us seated down the barn. There were 8 of us. We were new recruits. He spoke to each of us, asking what we did, about our families and such. And then he said, Okay, you four are mortar men, you four are machine guns. It was a pick of the draw. It could have been either one. So the next morning, the platoon sergeant brought us out in the woods and assigned us to the various squads. I got to the first section, first squad, and there was an empty hole in the ground. I'm glad I didn't have to dig that one. It was in the middle of winter, and the ground was hard as can be. And come nighttime, it was my turn to stand guard. And the sergeant says, okay, stay awake and be on the alert for German patrols. Right away, you freeze.
Where was this, John? Where was this?
Over in Belgium. So you're standing there in the middle of the night and it's cold, and all you're thinking about is football games and Thanksgiving dinner and a warm bed. But you know you have to stay awake because those guys down on the ground depend on you. Well, I soon got used to everything falling in. Now in the mortars, it's a bipod like that with a tube, and the men drop the projectile into it. Being low man on a totem pole, I carried the ammunition. Each round weighed 6.7 pounds. I carried 4 of them, 42 pounds. The other men carried the tube, the base plate, and the bipod. Each one weighed 35 pounds. There was a foot of snow or more out there. You had to dig the hole for the mortar about 4 by 4, 3 feet deep, and the ground is frozen hard. It took you half a day to build a hole. Then you had to dig your own foxhole. Sometimes you'd have the hole half dug, and the sergeant would come by and say, okay, we're moving out. And you just want to kill them, you know. After digging that hole, you got to go dig another one. Well, pretty soon you get used to it. But when I arrived at the depot center, I knew it was cold because it was middle of winter and it was 10 degrees, 10 and 0 degrees. And I was going to dress warm, so we went through the place where we got blankets and the helmets and ammunition and weapons. Now I had on a pair of winter underwear, top and bottom, 2 olive drab shirts, 2 olive drab pants, a sweater, a field jacket, and a heavy overcoat. Boy, was that heavy, but it kept me warm. Then I had a scarf and my wool knit cap and the helmet on top of that. And on my feet, I had the combat boots and a pair of galoshes on top of those. Well, you're trying to walk like that through a foot of snow, carrying everything. But you get used to it after a while. We didn't always have to carry it. Each section had a Jeep and a trailer. We threw the stuff in the Jeep and trailer to move, if you had to move. So things went on. I had a good friend. I met him. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, like I was. He was of Jewish persuasion and from Brooklyn. You can imagine the accent he had. I didn't know him during the war, but he came up to Massachusetts because his son was a scientist who worked in the laboratories. So I got to know him pretty well. We went into schools together and universities, and we talked about our experiences. And I was in his home one day. I went into his den. He had all memorabilia in there. And I was looking at his medals, and I says, what? I never seen that medal before. He says, that's the soldier's medal. Now, you don't have to be in combat to get the soldier's medal. For example, if you're in camp fording a stream, if you save another soldier's life from drowning, you might get the soldier's medal. So I said, how did you get that, Harry? Well, he says, we were out in the town of Bonnaroo in Belgium. And the captain called me up to headquarters, and he says, Cyrilnik, you know about food. You're in the restaurant business. I want you to make a big cauldron of coffee and some sandwiches. He says, you know those cows that were killed by the artillery? Well, make some sandwiches or something. Do something. So Harry gets to work with his crew for about an hour or so, and they hear screeching and growling outside. Screeching, screeching. Can only be one thing. It's a German tank. You can hear them coming a quarter of a mile away. Right, Joe? You know. So the captain says to Harry, grab that bazooka and come with me. And they went out and around the house. Harry said, I think I got a shot at it. I don't know, but it went into the woods. I says, you tell me you get the soldier's medal for going after that tank? Harry says, no, for making the hamburgers. And he did. Well, he was a great fellow. He died. He was 97 when he died, about 3 or 4 years ago. But he did get into the concentration camps. They had a task force of tanks and machine gunners. I didn't go. I was about 20 miles away. And they really saw those prisoners emaciated, starving. It was really traumatic. General Patton saw it and he threw up. He couldn't take it. But those are the things that happen like that. Well, that's one story. I think I'll turn it over to Joe now and see what he can say.
I hope you don't mind if I stand up. My name is Joe Landry, and I got drafted in 1943, and I got drafted again today. Thank you. But anyway, I was born in the little town of Shirley, next door. I entered the Army in March of 1943 at Fort Devens. They shipped us by train to Wilmington, North Carolina, to a temporary base out in the swamps with mosquitoes. But took all our basic training down there. I was in an outfit that shot down airplanes. And during the war, my outfit luckily shot down 8 German airplanes and 2 American airplanes. The reason we shot them down, they didn't answer the radio, and the headquarters thought they might have been what we call bed check Charlie. The Germans would fall into a flight coming back from a mission, and when the planes tried to land, they would start strafing the airfield and do a lot of damage. So we brought them down, which was a big mistake, but it happened. But anyway, like I said, I was shipped down to North Carolina. Then I got a 7-day furlough to come home just before Christmas to Shirley. And I was home one day, and I got a telegram to report right back to North Carolina that we were shipping out. So I get back down there, and I went into the orderly room and said, what's up? He says, oh, we're shipping out. Yeah, where are we going? To Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. I said, why didn't you tell me I'd have met you there? But anyway, they said they needed my help to load up all the equipment on boxcars. I was a truck driver. I drove this truck all over Europe at the taxpayer's expense. The gentleman mentioned something about getting $21 a month. That's what I got for a while. They gave me a truck to ride around in. They paid for the gas and everything, so it wasn't too bad. But we shipped out of Boston, landed in Gork Bay, Scotland. From there, we got on a train down to southern England to Falmouth Bay, and we were assigned to the British Air Command to shoot down German airplanes, which we got one. And then from there we were assigned to the First Army to go to France on D-Day. But thank God, I've thanked them ever since, that our outfit couldn't move the whole outfit at one time because we didn't have enough vehicles. So they took us off and put another outfit on. That particular outfit got almost annihilated completely on D-Day. But I went in on the 18th, and our first base was a little town called Insigny. It's pretty close to Saint Mary l'Église in France. And from there we proceeded down through a town called St. Lo, which the 8th and 9th Air Force practically eliminated the whole town. They came over from England, and it was almost like a caterpillar tread. The loaded ones were on the bottom, and they dropped their bombs on this little town called St. Lo, and the empty ones would go back to England for another load. And when they dropped the bombs in St. Lo, the infantry was trying to go through this small town, and it was their custom to lay out orange things on the ground so the Air Force could tell which side the Americans were on. Well, after the first bombing, all the dust and everything flew over, covered the orange tapes, and they dropped their bombs early, and they killed 350 Americans. One of them was the one-star general. So we started to move our guns across France. We went down through St. Lo, Bayeux, outside of Paris. Then on my first experience in Belgium was in Luxembourg. We set up guns around a great big railroad bridge to protect that. And then when the Battle of the Bulge started, we, as a truck driver, Patton didn't want his trucks idle because our outfit sat down for a week or two protecting bridges, airfields, ammo dumps, or whatever. So they assigned us to what they call a Red Ball Express. We hauled everything from toilet paper to dead bodies. And we moved the 82nd Airborne out of a little town called, outside of Reims, France, into the Battle of the Bulge. And one of my experiences in the Bulge was we were up close to the front lines, and the MP stopped us and said, the road is blocked, you can't get through. So we sat there for an hour or so, and finally the MP came back and said, the road is open, get the H out of here. So we did. And then one time we were ordered to go and pick up a bunch of, I call them living skeletons. It was at Dachau concentration camp. The ones that were still alive, we had to bring them to a hospital area because they couldn't let them eat all that they wanted. Yet they had to bring them back slowly in order for them to not die from overeating. But on a better note, I was driving my truck between Metz, France and Verdun, France, and there was a Jeep in front of me, and all military vehicles had the outfit numbers on the bumpers, and I recognized the numbers as my older brother's outfit. So I blew the horn, finally pulled over and stopped, and I wanted to find out where they were stationed. so I could probably go see him. And guess who popped out of the Jeep? My brother. Unbelievable. With all the troops and people in Europe, he was in front of me. And it was 2 days before Thanksgiving. We ended up having Thanksgiving together. He was in the 9th Air Force with the artillery planes attached to the 3rd Army. I was in the 3rd Army attached to the 9th Air Force at that time, protecting airfields. So it was kind of a coincidence. But anyway, them being in the Air Force, they sent an airplane back to England and got turkey and pie and all good fixings. So we had a great Thanksgiving and something to talk about for the rest of our lives. You know, he passed away about 5 years ago. And I'd like to mention a gentleman in the audience by the name of Chris DeMarkin. He was a young boy living in Belgium at the time, and he turned out to be one of my best friends. He's sitting in the audience, he and his wife Jean, and I'd like to thank them for all they've done for me. And also there's another gentleman. There's another gentleman standing here by the name of Joe Byron. He's the gentleman that runs this honor flight, and I had the pleasure of taking it several years ago, and it's something I'll never forget. So any of you veterans that can apply for it, they're doing Korea now, and it's worth the effort. They wouldn't even let me buy a bag of mints. Everything was paid for. So Joe, thank you. And thank you very much.
Mr. John McAuliffe. Joe, you can stay there too. Turns 95 today. 95 years old. Before we start, I am going to sing. Are you ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you. Hey. 95 years old, should we all live to tell the tale? That's pretty exciting, no doubt. John, thank you so much for coming. Any questions for the guys? Yes.
It's not a real serious question, but how did you get unstuck from the bugle?
How did you get unstuck from the bugle? Here, you're going to need a microphone for this one.
No. Time. By the way, while I've got the microphone, I was on the most recent honor flight to Washington. I would suggest any veteran or anyone in the audience that has an interest in honor flight, there's brochures here and an album of that flight.
Thanks very much. I think what we'll do, John, did you want to say something? Yeah, hold on a second.
I just want to read something to you. Everybody heard about the Battle of the Bulge. Joe was in that, and I was in that. It was the greatest battle ever fought by the American Army. They had some 30 divisions, and in those days a division was 14,000 people, infantry and trucks and medics and everything. But the Germans had an equal amount in the Battle of the Bulge. It lasted for 7 weeks, 6, 7 weeks, in the middle of January. there were 81,000 casualties, 20,000 American boys killed, and many wounded. Now, if you visualize a line from Hampton Beach down to Cape Cod, and then over to, from Hampton to Worcester, Mass., and Cape Cod to Worcester, Mass., you have a triangle. Well, that, from Cape Cod to Hyannis is the German line. And that 5 o'clock in the morning, they broke through on December 16th. They had, I don't know, hundreds of cannons going off, and they came rushing right in. Now, I have a description of the Ardennes. It was written by a clergyman, a Catholic priest, who was an army chaplain. Now, the Ardennes forest was between the southeast part of Belgium and the north of Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a very small country, about the size of Rhode Island. But only the half of the top was involved in the Battle of the Bulge. They called it the Forest of the Ardennes, a gentle timberland of open meadows, meandering streams, and tree-shaded country lanes. Long acclaimed for its mineral baths and charming resorts, it drew enormous crowds of visitors every year from all over Europe, offering rejuvenation of body, mind, and spirit, and some of the loveliest scenery in Northern Europe. The Ardennes forest, however, was also a battlefield. In mid-December 1944, it suddenly exploded into battle when Adolf Hitler staged a massive counterstroke against the Allies. The 6-week struggle that followed would turn the woods and marshes of the Ardennes into a forested hell, a wintry purgatory where death came in many forms, by cold, by hunger, or by an unseen shot in the dark from an enemy rifle. Seldom in World War II did the shadow of Golgotha hang so heavily over a battlefield, exacting so fierce a price from both the victors and the vanquished. A Jesuit priest wrote that. He was an army chaplain.
Maybe the gentleman might stay a couple minutes. For folks, if you want to come up and ask questions, that would be great. Again, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thanks for coming today. It means a lot to all of us. Big round of applause for our veterans. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.